Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to do a little lecture on organic food and agriculture, and this builds on the previous conversations I've had about industrialized food, soil management, how farms work, uh, all that stuff that we've been building up. But this lecture is also designed for anybody who just wants a casual understanding of what organic food and agriculture is really all about. Some people have heard about it, they don't know anything about it, they just know that when they go to the grocery store, there's an aisle that says organic food. There's a unique style of shopper that tends to go to the organic aisle. They pay higher prices for their food, and they don't seem to bat an eye about that. We're going to talk about who those shoppers are, what they're thinking about, what their concerns are, and what the difference is between the products that are organic versus non-organic, the things that are given to us from the industrial food supply. Okay, so I hope that you stay tuned for this entire lecture. I think you're going to find it informative. It shouldn't be too long on my part, but there's some great links that I'm going to mention as we go forward that will help expand upon certain points. For example, how can you invest in it? How is it different? How does it actually help people in the world, feed people? Organic is one of those things that you hear about all the time as a solution to a lot of our problems for pollution. But you'll also hear, yeah, but it doesn't feed enough people. It's too expensive. We're going to deal with that either in this lecture or through the links that I'm going to post at the end of the lecture. Okay, so check this out. I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, organic food approaches the problems on planet Earth differently than we approach most other problems. Usually we try to impose some kind of technology or biotechnology to solve the problem, but it turns out that our industrialization processes have created many of the problems. So one of the things that we realize is that organic does a different thing. It approaches things by reducing inputs and pollution. That's one of the things that happens. And the reason why it does this is because organic is the natural state of food. Human beings have been eating organic food all the way up until we learned how to industrialize and process foods. Prior to that, everything was organic. And the question is, was that in fact a better system? Did it feed enough people? Can it feed enough people? Can we merge technology with what we see in the organic food supply to be able to get better outputs and better outcomes and healthier food and healthier environment? And those that are advocates for organic agriculture argue, yes, that not only is the food healthier, but that it tastes better. And if it tastes better and it's more nutritious, you don't need to eat as much of it. And maybe you don't need to worry about weight loss problems or weight gain problems. So there's all kinds of possible advantages that people are looking at. I know nutritionists strongly advocate for organic frequently. And I think that you're going to enjoy this little discussion we're going to have on it. So organic agriculture is food growing practices that use no synthetic fertilizers. In other words, there's nothing unnatural being put onto the field or pesticides. So in the United States where I live, it's pretty common whenever you get an apple, even when I was a kid, that your parents would say, make sure you wash that apple before you take a bite of it. And of course, the reasons being is that we all know that there's pesticides sprayed all over most of the produce that we eat. So even our parents know that this is a problem. In organic agriculture, that's not an issue. You can come up and get an apple right off of an apple stand if it's an organic apple, and you can take a bite right out of it. It might have a little dirt on the surface because it's in nature. You just wash it to get the dirt off, but you don't have to worry about the pesticides. So it cannot have synthetic fertilizers or pesticides, but rely on biological approaches such as composting and biocontrol. In other words, biocontrol is where we use biological processes that normally happen in nature anyway and direct that towards a problem. We'll get into an example of that with respect to asparagus farmers here in a minute. In 1990 in the United States, the Organic Food Production Act was passed and establishes national standards for organic products. The USDA, which stands for the United States Department of Agriculture, issued criteria in 2000 by which food could be labeled organic. So if there's a label on your food package that says organic, it's usually a green label, and I don't know if I show it in here, but definitely some of the links I have will show you what that label looks like. If it says that it's organic and it's something that you are buying that happened after the year 2000, and hopefully most of this food you're eating, unless it's an old can of food from prior to 2000, if it has that label on it, you know that it's following those criteria. Now, some states, including California, Washington, and Texas, and over 80 nations have stricter guidelines than what the USDA has put together. So if you're eating something that's organic it has to go through a series of steps. It has to demonstrate that it is in fact organic for it to be sold as such. If it doesn't meet those steps, it cannot be sold as organic. This, by the way, I put in here because I wanted to show you what organic food looks like. This is organic broccoli, and there's seeds and tomatoes here and bananas. This is really healthy, very nutritious food. It's in a lot of ways probably healthier and more nutritious than regular food, or I should say non-organic food that you would get from an industrialized source. It's sweet, it's juicy. It doesn't always have the same uniform shape and color every single time. It comes in a variety of shapes and colors, but you can see that it could be just as good looking as anything that you can get from the non-organic aisle. So the food is just as good looking. It's just as easy to serve. You could be proud to have it at your table, but at the same time, be aware that it usually has a even stronger flavor, a better flavor. And a lot of top chefs actually prefer to cook with organic if they get the chance. So I want to talk about those criteria of what the USDA says is organic. For crops to be considered organic in the United States, the land must be free of prohibited substances for 3 years. In other words, no pesticides, no herbicides, no fungicides, things like this. It has to be completely clear and clean of that stuff. So a nice straight O horizon and A horizon in the soil that is not saturated with a lot of this garbage in it. Crops must not be genetically engineered. I haven't got into genetic engineering or bioengineering of the food supply. I'm going to get into that in my very next lecture. Essentially, with crops that are genetically engineered, you're taking a gene from one crop or from one organism, I'm saying, and you're passing it into the crop. And so it's very interesting that you can get some pretty bizarre outcomes from doing so, but some of these things have produced outcomes that a lot of farmers like. So we'll get into that in the next lecture. But the rule for organic is you cannot genetically engineer anything. It has to be something from nature. It has to be organic in its origin. It has to be fully natural in its origin. Okay. Crops must not be irradiated to kill bacteria. That is a common practice in a lot of industrial agricultures to irradiate crops to wipe out the bacteria. A lot of people see this as a better solution than using pesticides and herbicides on plants. That could be a problem. Sewage sludge cannot be used. It's not uncommon in countries to just go ahead and take raw sewage or even some treated sewage and dump it out into the fields. It's considered a fertilizer. It's not uncommon for this to be sold internationally. For organic, you're not allowed to use sewage sludge at all. Even in the United States, sewage sludge is sometimes utilized under certain circumstances. Organic seed and planting stock is preferred, and of course that makes sense, right? If you're going to grow organic plants, you want to make sure that the stock it's coming from or the seeds that it's coming from are usually raised in an organic way also, but it's not required, but it's definitely preferred. And most farmers do in fact do that. Farmers must not use synthetic fertilizers. This is absolutely forbidden. You may not use synthetic fertilizers. Crop rotation. This is the practice of changing your crops year after year so that you don't wind up removing all the nutrients from the soil. So crop rotation means, you grow corn one year, maybe soybeans the next year. You're rotating these things around. In fact, in my previous lectures, I talk about crop rotation and how that can be carried out. Cover crops. This is where you deploy crops on the ground. When we look at this image here, this organic farm here, we notice that the ground here is barren here. There's no cover crop here. In the wintertime, if it was to get stormy and there was no cover crop there, that surface soil could be washed away. One of the things that they're allowed to do is to plant cover crops. Animal or crop wastes are allowed. So in this case, we can let let's say that we were growing, I guess this is grapes here. If the grapes were allowed to die, the leaves would fall down to the ground, and that would become part of the natural organic horizon of the top of the soil. That winds up being part of the nutrient cycle, and so that will be part of next year's growth, this year's dead leaves. So that's the crop waste we're talking about here. In terms of animal waste, The way that nature usually works is, you have a grazer that moves through an area and then it leaves its waste products behind. That waste product is then part of the new nutrient cycle, just as we were talking about with the crop waste. So it provides fertility to that soil. I told you I was going to mention this situation with respect to asparagus. What's really interesting there is asparagus and sheep have a very interesting relationship. And in fact, this kind of ties into what we call biocontrol down here below. I'll get into that here in a moment. But sheep and asparagus have an interesting relationship in that sheep do not like the taste of asparagus, so they avoid it. Now, if you're an asparagus farmer, you can have a large field full of asparagus, and for weed control, instead of using pesticides and herbicides to wipe out, herbicides to wipe out all of the weeds, you can actually introduce sheep onto the field. The sheep aren't going to eat the asparagus; they don't like the flavor of it, but they'll wipe out all the weeds. And of course, when they leave their waste product behind, that waste becomes part of the fertility of that field. And so it becomes a natural cycle that helps grow more asparagus. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle all the way around. So that's what we're talking about here. And most conventional pesticides are prohibited. Pesticides, including herbicides, this is where I was going with earlier, that the sheep can provide biocontrol, and mechanical practices are allowed. So mechanical practices include that we can go out and we can hoe, or we can weed with our hands to remove the weeds. But in the case I was bringing up with the sheep and the asparagus, biocontrol does this, and it also provides the animal waste as a fertilizer to that field. So you can see how organic farmers are thinking differently. Now the inputs are lower, right? So if you're not having to use fertilizer, you're not buying fuel for tractors, you're not buying herbicides and pesticides, this thing should be, the crops coming out of organic fields should be cheaper because you don't require all of those inputs, right? But when we go to the supermarket, it turns out they're more expensive. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about this, or at least I should say one of the links I have is going to deal with that very question. Why is organic food more expensive? Okay, so that's for crops. Now for livestock, these are animals. To be considered organic, mammals must be raised organically from the last third of gestation. Poultry from the second day of life. So once a chick is born, by the very next day, it needs to be raised on an organic diet under organic criteria. Those criteria include the fact the feed must be 100% organic, but you can use vitamin supplements. Those are allowed. So you can supplement with vitamin supplements, but the feed must be 100% organic, which means corn or grain or whatever it is grown in the way that we see up here, not the way that a lot of farmers do it. Now, dairy cows must receive 80% organic feed for 9 months, followed by 3 months of 100% organic feed. Those are minimum criteria. A lot of farmers go 100%, but that's the year 2000 USDA guideline is 80% for 9 months, followed by 3 months of 100% organic feed. Hormones and antibiotics are prohibited. Vaccines are permitted. So this is something you see on a lot of meat packaging when you go to the grocery store. It'll say no hormones used ever. But usually antibiotics are in there. That's another part of it. And this is part of the fact that when you have animals in an industrialized agriculture system, so an industrial farm, when you have animals too close together, you have to give them antibiotics. If you don't give them the antibiotics, they get sick. And if they get sick, they die. Or they can transmit that disease to other herds, and then you wind up having problems with the health of those herds. Under organic situations, hormones and antibiotics are completely prohibited. Vaccines are permitted. And of course, the question is, how do hormones and antibiotics, how do you keep them out of a herd? And the answer is you don't pack them so full that the animals get sick. If you're giving them clean food and clean environment, and you're giving them good grass to graze on, in the case of dairy cows, they tend to not get sick. If you're packing them too close together and you're giving them the same stuff that you're seeing happen at other farms, then you're going to inherit the problems of those other farms. So it's just a completely different paradigm. Also, animals must have access to the outdoors. This is a major problem with chicken farms. A lot of pig farms and And in some cases, it's not so bad actually with cattle, because usually you want the cows outside because they take up so much space anyway. But with chicken farms, it's not uncommon for the animals to be inside like all the time. So they must have access to the outdoors. All right, so what about the obvious economic benefits? Well, organic approaches reduce inputs and pollution, right? So if you have less pollution, there's less to clean up. If there's less inputs, that means it's easier to do. Must mean that you're not having to invest as much to get it to happen. So farmers have lower input costs, which creates enhanced income. So organic crops do fetch a higher price. And the reason why they fetch a higher price is because there's a huge demand for them. It's not because the cost of it is so high. It's actually less expensive. It's because there's so many people that want this kind of food because it's not being subjected to a lot of the things we discussed here on this diagram. Okay? Reduced chemical pollution and soil degradation also help lower input costs, because if you're not having to worry about losing the topsoil, then you don't have to worry about the fertilizers and all the others and the plowing and all the other stuff that goes into that. You just simply get to reap the benefits of that policy. These farmers, they adopt organic practices primarily to practice stewardship toward the land. Obstacles include risks and costs of switching to new methods. It can be, it can be really expensive. Remember, in the United States, there's a 3-year wait period for a farm so that you can convert it from an industrial farm into an organic farm. That is a huge amount of time for a farm to sit and undergo that transition. Transitioning to certified organic may take years, and it's extremely expensive. So what is the farmer supposed to do in the meantime? Obviously, they're going to have to get the farm prepped for the organic situation, but while at the same time, they still got to put food on the table. That's a problem. That's a big concern. Now, consumers are concerned about pesticides' health risks. They also want to improve environmental quality. Those are really big parts of the philosophy of most committed organic buyers. Obstacles include the higher price of organics. And so there's always kind of this feeling that organic food is for rich people and that it's too expensive for most people to afford. But it does turn out that when we look at the demographics, at least at the data that we get from the United States, that those people that are buying organic actually meet the perfect cross-section of the United States, from rich to poor, and based upon all the other social demographics that we can measure. In other words, the people that buy organic look just like the people of the United States on average. And it turns out that organic farmers can't keep up with demand, and that's the reason why the price is so high. U.S. consumers paid $48 billion in 2019. Worldwide sales increased 638% from 1999 to 2018. That's a huge growth industry. Production is increasing. In 2019, over 2 million hectares, which is 5 million acres in the United States, occurred. 37 million hectares were grown worldwide, which is 91 million acres. That's still just less than 1% of the total agricultural land. It turns out the demand is closer to 25%. And so in other words, people want it to be about 25% of agricultural land. That's the demand for organic food, but only 1% of it is. And that's the reason why there's the price difference. And that's why organic is more expensive. There's just so much demand. People want it. If they have a choice between organic and a non-organic alternative, there are some people that are dedicated organic buyers that will always buy the organic version no matter what. And they're a growing slice of the world demographic. 2/3 of organic agricultural land is in developing nations currently. 30% of Mexico's coffee production is organic, and 75% of organic coffee supply comes from Latin America, to show that this is a growth industry, not just in the United States, but worldwide. What we see here, this is a urban agriculture farm in suburban Dallas, Texas. We actually have a very close friendship with these people here at Bonton Farms. This is a farm that uses no herbicides, no pesticides. They grow wonderful produce. They have an amazing business. And they actually take people that had drug problems or had prison problems in the past and use the farm to get them the work experience they need to get them back into society as productive members. And the success they've had is incredible. So if you're ever in the Dallas, Texas area, take some time to go to Bonton Farms and buy yourself a sandwich and get yourself a drink at their farm. It's an incredible experience, and know that everything is organic and the money goes to a good purpose. Now, the European Union does things a little differently than the United States does. And of course, every country does it differently. But the European Union is a very big block of people, about 500 million people. So we want to talk about them. The European Union is an important trading partner in the world. And so knowing what they do is important. So the European Union supports farmers financially during conversion to organic farming. This is something that is not necessarily done in the United States. So this is very different. The conversion can mean a temporary loss of income. So this support is a subsidy to cover external costs. So that cost of conversion, as we're talking about, can be quite expensive, right? It take you years to move from industrialized to organic. The European Union does financially support its farmers through a subsidy system to take care of them. Now, the United States is different. The US offers no such subsidies, so organic production lags what is happening in the European Union. We did actually see an attempt. It wasn't a very large attempt, but it was an attempt in 2008. The Farm Bill, which gave $112 million over 5 years for organic agriculture. Now, given the amount of production coming out of the United States, $112 million isn't a lot, considering that consumers paid $48 billion just in 2019 alone. But you get the idea. This is something, right? It's not nothing. So the United States is looking at this as being something that is of value. However, there are market-based solutions that do exist. And one of the videos I'm going to recommend at the end of it is somebody that's going to talk about those market-based solutions. There are entrepreneurs out there that realize that if you take an industrial farm and convert it to organic, you can suddenly increase the income produced by that farm because organic fetches a higher price. And they take advantage of that higher price. And what they do is they come in, instead of using government subsidies, they carry out that process. They fund that process, and they make sure that the farmers are taken care of, and they carry out this process through markets as opposed to through government subsidy. Okay, so there's different ways that we can do it. The United States is a more market-based approach for organic production, whereas the European Union, or for conversion, whereas the European Union uses a more governmental subsidy system to be able to carry out that same process. So they're just different ways of looking at it. The United States is definitely behind on this, but there is a large amount of capital starting to build up the United States to deal with these organic farm conversions. In the long run, organic farming is at least as profitable as conventional farming. And in fact, there's very good research out now that shows that medium-sized organic farming is more productive than any size industrial agriculture that's out there. And it saves the environment. It saves on health. It's, the pesticides and the herbicides, they're all gone. It's good for the soil. It's good for the land. It's good for the people. So when people say you can't, feed the world with it, we actually know that that isn't wrong. We probably are going to require organic to be able to feed the growing population of the world going forward. Okay. By the way, this is an organic farm in Denmark, so I picked this because of the EU reference up here. This is up on top of an old, I guess it's a parking garage, if I can remember, 5-floor, an old car auction in Copenhagen, Denmark. And they're growing food up here. All right, so we got some great resources I strongly recommend for you to check out on organic agriculture and how to get involved in organic investments. So one of these is, why is organic food so expensive, which is a TED Talk. It's a wonderful talk given by an entrepreneur in the United States that converts industrialized agricultural land into organic land, or organic agricultural land, and why he's gotten involved into it. And he gets into some really interesting ideas for not only how to make money in it, but why it's beneficial to everybody to look at organic food as a possible food alternative to industrialized food. The other one is, the other two, The Natural Effect is a great one. This is put out, I can't remember which group it was, but it's a league of producers that do organic food that wanted to say there's a difference between organic and natural, the 100% natural or all natural. You should check out that link on The Natural Effect, where they put together an interesting video that very clearly and very clearly and in a funny way shows the difference between organic and natural. And of course, what Cuba could teach America about organic farming. Now, this isn't about the fact that Cuba is a communist country. In fact, it's the fact that Cuba is a communist country that organic farming works. because the fact is that they don't have good markets. The markets aren't as effective as many of the other places. It's difficult to get certain things inputted or imported into that country. And so in the 1990s, after the Soviet Union dissolved, who was their chief trading partner, Cuba couldn't get access to a lot of the fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides it needed to keep its people fed. And it had no other choice. It reverted to organic farming. And that is a booming part of their economy, despite the fact that it is a society that has had deep issues with some of the communist policies that came from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And that improvement that they're seeing in their food supply is largely due to an understanding of how organic farming should operate in Cuba. So America can learn a lot about what the Cuban experience was as they divested themselves off those pesticides and herbicides simply because they couldn't afford them. Okay, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Check out those links. I know you're going to like them, and I'll catch you in the next video when we talk about biotechnology and its role in the food supply. Take care.